I'm really
Yes.
excited to see the app finally live.
Yes.
How does it feel?
Super excited, man. Super pumped.
Awesome.
Thank
So,
you.
where are you both dialing in from? Tell us a bit about yourself. Let people understand who are the people behind this wonderful new app.
So I'm dialing from Bangalore. I come from Kerala, originally from Kerala, born and brought up there, and now resides in Bangalore. Yeah.
Yeah. So
Fantastic. And Dipankar, you?
I'm Dipankar. I'm dialing in from Scotland, and yeah, we are here because my wife's doing the PhD here. But yeah, I'm enjoying myself.
Sunny Scotland and
Very sunny.
buzzy Bangalore.
Ah, yes, absolutely.
Awesome. So today I just want people who listen in to understand what's the mission of Kirana Pro. What are you really trying to do there? What's the role of yet another quick commerce company in shaping the entire ecosystem? But I want to begin by understanding who are both of you. Give us a bit of a flavor about your past lives. What got you together to start this company? Let people understand who you both are.
Sure. Should I go first?
Yes, Deep,
Yes.
go ahead.
Okay. So my name is Deepak. I am from Kerala, like I mentioned. I studied in a town called Thrissur, and then I studied computer science in a northern part of Kerala called Kasargod, where
Hmm.
I was part of Lal Bahadur Shastri College of Engineering in Kasargod, doing computer science. And the spirit of entrepreneurship started way before college. I started my first company while in high school. That was called Swadesh Solutions, which was inspired from this movie called Swadesh of Shah Rukh Khan. And I felt like I want to do something for my home and my people. So I started designing websites at the age of 14 or 15. And I started making some pocket money out of it. And I felt like so happy about it. So I felt like I want to build a team. And then I started reading about entrepreneurs for the first time. So I started reading about people like Steve Jobs, people like Mark Zuckerberg, and one thing that I realized is the fact that they all go to college and find like-minded people, right? So I went to college
Mm.
for that, not to study, but to find co-founders. And I ended up in finding three amazing talent from the same college which I studied. And together we started a company called Innos in 2008. And we built a service called SMS Gyan. And within a course of 5 years, it went on to become the world's largest offline search engine. And
Oh,
then I did two more startups. One was in the Bay Area called Quest, and the last one was called Lookup in India. And yeah, that's pretty much about me. And now I'm doing Kirana Pro. This
and
is
did you
how I.
both know each other,
Yeah,
Dipankar, Deepak? Okay,
of
great.
course.
How?
Maybe.
And give us
Yeah,
a
I
bit
think
of a
yeah,
flavor. Yeah.
I think that will be an interesting one. So a bit about myself. I'm Dipankar. I I I've lived most of my life in Calcutta, and then I sort of shifted to Delhi. In Delhi, I sort of was very lucky to study in IIT Delhi with some of the best sort of minds of the country. It was a interestingly intense experience, and I did computer science, and that means that I basically got to basically hang out with some of the best potential guys who now run pretty large startups at this point of time. So I'm lucky
This
like
was
that.
for undergrad. This was
This
for
was for
undergrad.
undergrad. Yes, yes.
So, what
And
was your IIT rank, if you remember?
I did 50. So yeah,
wow.
I mean,
Yeah.
ideally is not that. I mean, it's still one of the better ones at this point of time. At least at our times, it was the best one, right? So the thing is that after sort of doing IIT, I wanted to really try out working on the internet. That was my thing. I figured out that the internet was the best place to work in. I was one of the first five guys to be in Google Summer of Code back in 2007. Like there were only five guys out
Hmm.
of the US who got in. I was one of them. And then I decided that the internet was where I wanted to build my entire career in. I was a very early employee. I was the sixth employee at SlideShare. I actually called up uh, Amit Ranjan in the basement in Green Park, and I just walked into the office and said I wanted to work for you guys. And I of course didn't do the pre-placement. I got into what was then known as Lehman Brothers, and then became Nomura very soon after. But yeah, fun times, like exceptionally interesting times. I sort of did SlideShare, and SlideShare sort of taught me very quickly that I could build pretty much anything on the internet. So I started something called Quippy. Quippy went on to become what we know as Twitter right now. Twitter had at least 10 competitors. We were the fifth largest in the world at that point of time. It was operating out of Delhi. It was crazy. That's how actually Deepak and I sort of know each other, because we were the first sort of batch of startups in 2007, 8, 9 who really sort of started off doing these
Wow,
large.
it's been 15 years that you both sort of know each other.
Yes,
Yeah,
yes,
yeah.
we know each
And
other.
one more I want to highlight, I was the seventh user of Quippy
Yes,
back in 2000.
he was the seventh
Yeah.
user of Quippy, and it was great fun, because at that point of time, Quippy was primarily an American company. For all practical purposes, we didn't know how to set up an American LLC. We didn't have the money to do a lot of things, and there's practically no money to do any social startups in India. There's still no money to do any social startups in India, sadly. But I think it's very hard to do certain kinds of startups in India. After that, I sort of worked in payment companies. I did e-commerce. My last few gigs have been, I worked at Hike. Hike was a lot of fun. Like Hike Messenger, before it sort of has transitioned to the gaming thing, I think it's a fantastic company to work within. I did a few startups in the Martech space called Octo AI, which was again very similar to segment.com. I don't know if people know about it. Sorry, Deepak. Yeah.
Voice is not happening is what people are complaining. Oh, it's
Voice?
working. Okay, it's
Okay.
working.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
On the hike front, by the way, another Network Capital member,
Yeah.
Abhilasha Sinha, which you guys should speak with, she also worked at Hike for a bit.
yeah, I mean, and Hike was like, I cannot say good enough things about the culture at Hike. I think fantastic place to do stuff in. Like they actually let me, like, publish over 25 patents in a single year.
Oh,
It's crazy.
wow.
Like I thought Hike had the crazy innovation culture going for it. It's very different right now. Hike, it's just different, but Hike used to be something else. And then I also had the thing of running like a complete ad network at Nika. Nika did very well in their IPO,
Yeah.
so I sort of did all the ad tech, the affiliate bit at Nika. I really enjoyed doing it. They did some sort of social things, like social software as well. I really enjoyed doing that. Like we built something like TikTok within the Nika application. It was good fun. And right now, like Kirana Pro, interestingly, is an idea that I've been discussing with Deepak over the last 1.5 years. Actually, it's been more than 1.5
Really?
years. Yes, we've been
Yeah.
discussing
Yeah.
this. I've been trying to convince him to do something for the last 2 years in this space, and I don't know. It's just like a whole bunch of things coming together, where suddenly Deepak also sort of sees the quick commerce movement happening. It sort of coincides with this whole idea that I had, that you could essentially just broadcast your needs to any sort of shops, and the shops would actually respond back saying that, you know what, we can fulfill you. And you can basically think of it like an auction model. So I was basically thinking of it as a very simplistic auction model, but essentially quick commerce has accelerated that direction, where I think you have a lot more decentralized stores. Those decentralized stores can fulfill orders which are coming in from any sort of place locally. That's happening right now. So I mean, the
Right.
discussion that we have had for the last couple of years has revolved around what looks like Kirana Pro right now. But yeah, it's not an idea we just had
Yeah.
3 months back, and we've just done it. We've been thinking about it for like nearly 24 months. So
But that's really interesting. I just want our listeners to take away a few things from this. One is that both of you have a lot of shared context. You grew up in, similar startup networks. You know each other, and I notice a lot in successful founders and people who come together and have fun while building is that there tends to be some history, or there's like shared experiences. Not always, but it helps. And second is that the power of networks. So because both of you started building fairly early, so it seems like you had access to different kinds of networks, so brainstorming sessions, and ideas don't just come off one day. That light bulb moment sometimes flickers over a period of time. And it's something that I see over and over again, even when we hosted Sanjay Nair, who some of you may know from KKR India and
Yeah.
Sorin now. He also talks about his investment decision making mental models. He talks about this over and over again: shared context, big problem, and ideas blossoming over a period of time. So, take this away as you dive more into this deep dive into what these two are building. Now, let's start from the basics. What is quick commerce? And give us a lay of the land and help us figure out where does Kirana Pro fit in. Both of you can sort of jam together on this, but I want everyone to go with a very clear idea.
Sure. Sure. Dipankar, why don't you go first?
Right. I think quick commerce has got very well defined as a space at this moment. I think it's very clear that that we think of it in terms of delivery times, which is typically 10 to 20 minutes, a certain set of fixed inventory, it seems. Uh, but essentially, it's a replacement for a lot of the things that we would have usually done with local stores and with the chotu of the local store. Right? Essentially, it just sort of replaced that paradigm with an app from the initial sort of structure of the market itself. Now it's basically gone into saying that, you know what, we're going to do dark stores, we're going to make it, we're going to increase the scope of the inventory. Now we can buy a phone as well. But again, I think the basics of quick commerce were always, you know what, I want something, I want some snacks, I want something really small, a limited sort of inventory, I want it really fast, and can you get it to me really fast, right?
And I don't want to pay too much for the service, for the
Correct.
convenience.
Correct. Exactly. So I think time and that, I think it's questionable whether it's the paying too much bit has been optimized or not. I think that we can also see that with the unit economics, I think that's playing out very differently as expected. But essentially the broad contour of the consumer aspect of it is that I want convenience. I used to have this convenience. I could call someone, they would just come to my home and give me stuff. Now I just go on the app, I just do it facelessly. It sort of turns up at my doorstep, and I can get it replaced if I want, and I can pay online electronically. I think that's also playing into this entire cycle. I think UPI has helped. I think without UPI, we couldn't have done this a couple of years back. It was much harder to do payments. A lot of these things have just happened. So because we've been discussing this for the last couple of years, we can also see that where the sort of capital investment has gone into the quick commerce market. Like you can see a lot of money being spent to do certain things, like delivery has to be sorted out. You need to essentially optimize for catalog. We can dive a bit deeper into why we feel each one of those problems has been. I think they're sort of solving it structurally incorrectly, but we can discuss that. But essentially,
Yeah,
there's a whole chunk of
let's
capital
do
being
that,
deployed into those aspects.
because many people have asked me questions about, is this model ever going to become profitable? What's the play here? What are the various ways in which different stakeholders are attacking the problem? And then we can, of course, go into your approach. What, if anything, is different? So tell us
Absolutely.
about the pain points of making this work.
Sure. I think I'll just let Deepak sort of talk about how he feels about quick commerce as a space, and then we can sort of
Yeah,
do that as well.
makes sense.
Yeah. So from my experience, right, I think before Zepto came into the place, before Blinkit came into the place, I had a similar startup called Lookup, which we started in 2014. And we were actually the pioneers in the space to introduce quick commerce. If some people know that, because you can Google the iPhone sales we did within 19 minutes with Sangeeta Mobile partnership, right? So we figured out that this local commerce market is going to come more and more contextual towards coming closer to the proximity of users, and
Yeah.
that defined the commerce era. And that time it was called hyper local market, right? Hyper local was the term. And then what happened? This introduction of dark stores happened around the world. So when I was actually living in the valley, I actually experienced Q-commerce for the first time. And that is when, I called up Dipankar and said, like, this is happening in the valley. And he
So
was
what
in.
was happening? Tell us. I'm not sure what you're referring to.
So there was Instacart, which was a slow moving process, right? You get groceries delivered in, let's say, 1 hour, 2 hour window, right? And then came Getter. I don't know how many people know Getter, but that was a huge thing in the US, in the Valley, especially in New York when I used to stay. Getter was the last minute option, just like Blinkit, for getting anything on demand, right? So I was quite addicted. And I felt like, why can't we do something similar in India? But the reason I didn't want to attempt was for the fact that, Indian economy is completely dependent on small stores, Kirana stores, right? So I don't want to invent something which becomes an evil for the mankind, or at least for the country that I'm from. So I decided not to do that. And from then onwards, I was being, thinking about like what to do better, or like how to make this happen. But I had no clue. So I returned back to India back in 2020. And that is when me and Dipankar started jamming about ideas. And then around 2021, if I'm right, Dipankar, we said like, why
Yeah.
don't we think about decentralization, right? That was a catching up thing. Because if you look at even on the crypto space or anything, decentralization is a coined word in the blockchain space. So
Hmm.
Dipankar interestingly told me about why don't we decentralize offline stores,
Hmm.
and that caught me up because I felt like that is something unique. Nobody has done it, right? And that is how Indian economy is built. It's a classification of decentralized stores offline, right? You have Kirana stores, you have supermarkets, you have mom and pop stores, everything around you. And how do we interconnect each one of them was the biggest question. So we started ideating, and the initial idea was that why don't we build an app which can connect with local businesses similar to Lookup, and put a sales team and get them onboarded, right? So, but Dipankar wasn't happy. So he told me like, no, I'm not gonna make you do the heavyweight of the sales job again. We need to have a technology in place which can solve it. So around this year, and I think it was in April, I came across this concept called ONDC. And I don't know how many people in your network know about ONDC, which stands for Open Network for Digital Commerce. That
Let's
is
assume that they don't. So
okay.
it'll be very important to explain
Yes, yes,
decentralization, the
yes,
challenges of the Get Here model,
yes,
and Instacart as well, and then sort
yes.
of the evolution of the idea. And we're now broadcasting it to everyone. We want to create lots of people
Sure.
interested in this idea. Yeah.
Sure. So yeah, we came across this concept called ONDC, and I found it quite revolutionary because if you look at the UPI adoption, right, which was the first innovation that happened in India and went across the world, right? Now, if you go to France, you can use a Paytm app and purchase items, right? So something made in India but made for the world, right? So I think ONDC itself has the same potential. Indians are actually leapfrogging what we call the digital commerce into something called a revolutionary commerce. Because end of the day, you don't need in lookup when we were doing, we need to do everything heavyweight, like onboarding stores to delivering items. In fact, I used to deliver items personally at lookup, right? So that was a huge challenge, and it was a nightmare. So we came across this ONDC network, and we talked to Mr. Koshi who is the CEO of ONDC, and apparently he's also from Kerala. So we had a Mallu connection, and that was the start of the new idea of Kirana Pro. I quickly came across this domain, so I have this passion of collecting domains, similar to collecting stamps, right?
And I think you
So
made some money out of them, of some of the domains, if I'm
yes,
not
yes,
mistaken.
yes, absolutely, absolutely. That was my fun project. And so, but apparently this Kirana.pro, I bought it for 300 rupees. So this
Hmm.
is the cheapest
Well
domain
done.
I ever. Yeah. So, anyways, so we got to know about ONDC. We started learning more about it. In fact, anybody who want to learn about it, it's pretty easy. Go to ondc.org, learn about that course material. It's pretty fast, and they are super responsive and super helpful. So the team behind the scene is not just us and our employees, but in the entire ecosystem, the ONDC team. I want to have to thank them because they been the biggest backbone for us, right? So in ONDC, you have two apps. One is the consumer side, which we call as the buyer app, and the seller side, which we call as the seller apps, right?
Hmm.
So we come in the category of buyer app, which is a consumer-driven mechanism that we are trying to introduce, right? And we don't need to onboard merchants because it's already sorted out. So INDC was
Hmm.
started like a couple of years ago. I think it was started like 3 years ago. And what they have done successfully is that they have implemented all the local businesses onto the platform already. So Because of that, we can literally launch the app across any market in India without
Mhm.
any. We can just plug and play, and that is the beauty of ONDC. And I recommend anybody who is listening and watching this video to check out ONDC and start building applications on top of it. Anything for that matter, you can reach out to them, and they are super helpful.
So it seems like an interesting investment in digital public infrastructure by the government. But Dipankar, build on it. Tell us the
Sure.
ONDC landscape and the strategy that Kirana Pro is employing. And while you do so, it'll be helpful to sort of do a bit of a jam on what are the other players doing conceptually. We don't need to critique anybody. We're just here to explore.
Yeah. So I think that the genesis of ONDC is primarily like a decentralized network. They were actually initially a group of people who were trying to build. They're from the crypto space. They're actually trying to do
Okay.
something in the decentralized way,
I
right?
see.
And what happened was that they have implemented a lot of the decentralized primitives for commerce, uh, but they've done it now under like the whole sort of government umbrella, right? Which means that they have significant support in terms of understanding how GST works, for example, on the network, how is money transferred across the network. Because when you're actually trying to build an app interface, or a seller app for that matter, or a buyer app, right? There's an exchange of goods, there's exchange of money, there's exchange of multiple things on that network, right? Which means that there's some level of data privacy that has to be maintained. There has to be certain kind of like the taxation regime that has to be resolved. The interesting bit is that we believe that ONDC is actually trying to solve a lot of those challenges for both the buyer and the seller, right? But both the buyer and the seller necessarily don't realize the complexity of this today. That's one of the reasons that companies like Zepto, Swiggy, and all of them will continue to exist, and they should exist, of course, because there are a lot of challenges that need to be resolved before something has to be paid for and something has to be acquired, right?
Mm.
That's the first thing. Now, one might go on to believe that I just walk into a store and I pay the store guy money and I just get the goods, right? That transaction actually abstracts away a lot of challenges, right? That Maggie packet or the atta packet that you've just bought, right, has gone through some supply chain, right? That potentially has to pay taxes. They have to transport stuff. Money has to be exchanged, and so on and so forth, right? If you think about the many challenges and the many sort of layers of complexity, right, that exists in such transactions, which the consumer does very easily, right? We sometimes forget that this whole idea of Zepto and all of this is like we tend to sort of simplify that, right? We say, oh wow, Zepto is so simple, but Zepto is not simple. Of course, it's not, right? Our advantage is that the way we are thinking about it is that ONDC is actually onboarding sellers who are actually there on ground. They're actually running businesses, right? What is our challenge as Kirana Pro? We want to compete in that quick commerce space, but we necessarily don't want to be going across the country, across the breadth of the country to try to get those merchants on our application. It's a very hard task, and that by itself is a company. Like that's a large company to build. If you can onboard all the sellers, that's a large company to build by itself, but it requires
Mm.
a lot of capital, right? So the way we are viewing this entire thing is that we believe that ONDC will essentially solve the seller onboarding problem, which is a significant part of the cost base
Yeah.
for any such network to be built out, right? Now, of course, they are not going to do it for free, right? They're going to do it in a slow and phased manner, but as they keep doing it, right, there'll be businesses like Kirana Pro that's going to sit on top of them. So they do need businesses like us to help monetize and subsidize all the onboarding, right? So ONDC can't be running for free, right? So the way we are viewing this opportunity is that as ONDC continues to cover more and more pin codes across the country, right, our services are actually the way to subsidize the growth as well
Yeah.
as sort of create the leads that are required to make people stay on ONDC, right? So ONDC also will eventually go from just onboarding to trying to make sure that the seller stays on the app, right? So they will also have to reach the point where it's just not about onboarding, it's also about stickiness, right? So platform like us, right, when we are successful and when we are growing, we'll provide the lead base for ONDC to continue growing. So that's the symbiotic relationship between us and ONDC, right? If you look at ONDC purely from where they are at today, ONDC actually provides fundamental fundamental decentralized primitives. I think decentralization is a sort of complex terminology, but they essentially give you pre-built contracts, legal contracts. They give you pre-built APIs, right, that you can use to integrate, let's say, a delivery service. Like, you want to integrate new class of payment service. A lot of that service can just be integrated into their systems, right? So you can think of them in terms of being of abstracting out all the things that you would require, right, as a developer or as a seller or as a buyer. They just make it really easy for you to basically deal with everyone in a completely interoperable fashion. That's their goal, right? That's the big goal. And I think it's a brilliant goal from a perspective, because again, Kirana Pro wants to uh, build a much better consumer experience. We want consumers to be able to find stuff from the catalog faster, using their native language, using all kinds of like interactions. But we necessarily don't want to be trying to solve the problem of onboarding more sellers on the platform, which is again a different class of problem altogether from our perspective, right? So
It's very
that is the
interesting.
contour of the current sort of like relationship we have built with ONDC, as compared to, let's take the example of Zepto or Swiggy or anyone else, right? If you think about it, for them, uh, density matters. Let's say they want to open a dark store, they need to have density of orders within that locality, right? Now, if you imagine a Kirana store in India would serve approximately 100 to 200 families, right? Zepto, however, has to build dark stores that has to serve much higher density. So from our
What is the dark
perspective,
store? It'll be helpful for our audience
a
to know.
dark store, yes. So a dark store is typically a warehouse, a really small warehouse where a certain set of SKUs, items, or goods would be kept, right? They would preferably be kept in a predictive fashion, which means that they would know that there's a demand for a certain set of goods. So they will try to provision it beforehand, because they have data, so they can forecast, so they can basically keep that warehouse filled up with the right kind of things, right? By the way, your Kirana store also has to do this, right? They just do it in a very different fashion, but they also have to do this. So there's some level of forecasting that is required. But dark stores essentially are faceless, digital, forecastable warehouses where goods are kept, so that as soon as you type in on the app that you want something, some guy is going to get a message. They're going to look in their sort of digital inventory inside, and they will pick it up and they're going to send it to you. That's about it, right? That's what dark stores are. You don't really need dark stores. If you think about it, our Kirana folks have already done all of this, and they're doing this at massive scale across all the pin codes in India. dark Dark stores really don't make sense. It won't be surprising if one day you see a Zepto store, which basically means that the dark store actually has a storefront. Why not, right? Because if you already have real estate where you are sending stuff out, you might as well open a storefront and you just let people walk in and buy it, and we're back to the same thing again. So dark stores will essentially become Kirana stores. And I don't see the correlation. If you think about it, a lot of wholesale dealers, right? If you go to various parts of, at least Delhi, right? You go to the wholesale dealers, they all have storefronts. They might have a
Hmm.
godown, but they definitely have storefronts. So you can go and buy stuff right off the warehouse. So it's not counterintuitive to think about what exists today and where the truth lies. So I sort of believe that the dark store phenomenon is like one of those sort of four steps back, but again, we're going to come to the same point again. So it's interesting, but more or less that the logic
So
of the economics model.
that's what most people in India are doing at the moment. Is that what other quick commerce players in the US and other markets are doing? I know the dynamics are different, but is that the broad strategy?
It's the same.
Yeah, it's the same.
In fact, quick commerce is not invented in India. This is a phenomenon which was started 5 years ago. So there are companies like Gorilla, if you know about them, they are based out of
Yeah.
Europe. And there is a Getter, like I mentioned. These are companies which actually, some of them is non-existence now because they have raised billions of dollars and burned everything. And none of these e-commerce companies has actually went public because most of them are not profitable. And it's a tough market. So I would like to add that, the as the name suggests, right, we don't need dark stores, we need bright stores. So in fact, in India, you look at all these stores, we have all these bright Kirana stores near you. So think about connecting them. That is what we are trying to do.
Yeah.
I really like the way that you're thinking about the relationship with the Kirana store. Tell me, Deepak, why does that relationship matter? How does your approach, say, contrast with, say, other players about empowering the Kirana stores or becoming a complement or becoming a competitor? What's the market like, and where do you all fit in?
I, I think that, see, if you look at all the KPIs that have been set for all the quick commerce players, right? They're all talking about pin code coverage, but pin code coverage is already nearly 100% for all the Kirana stores, right? I mean, uh, what is the goal? The goal is that you have to have goods, you have to have provision for certain level of goods within a store, right?
Hmm.
Which can give you things. So you can solve for end mile delivery, right? Potentially within villages, within towns, within larger urban areas, it can be solved. Yes, maybe that is the problem to solve. But the class of problem to solve by basically pushing the inventory management and essentially a lot of these things have been abstracted. They tend to abstract it out into the so-called digital dark stores, right? What we have started to understand after looking at everyone is that I think that KPIs are at mismatch with what profitability at scale would look like. So they can't cover the entire country, not with this strategy. It's very hard,
Hmm.
right? I would even go to say that it's not going to be possible by them, but they won't be able to do it. But the thing is that we do want to cover the entire country. We do believe that a digital overlay like ONDC should exist, will exist. And as the digital overlay gets grown out, which UPI has done, it's taken time, but it's happened, right? It will happen, right? And you will have like this kind of advanced sort of consumer end software like ours, which will sit on top of these networks and actually give the consumer the kind of experience they want, because mobile phones are everywhere. Geo is everywhere, right? So one thing is right is that Geo is everywhere, UPI is everywhere. We definitely know that ITC and their distributors are there in every pin code. They have coverage.
Hmm.
So in some ways, we are solving for a consumer experience or for advanced consumer experiences at this point of time. We believe that India has reached that point. I think that thinking about it in terms of the dark store is actually possibly a step back, right? Because the pin code coverage problem has been solved. Right? It's been solved for some time now. I think it's probably been solved even like even before we were born. But that's the thing, right? I think that India is an interesting economy where the software or the consumer experience has not really gone to the level where it covers the entire country. I think the consumer experiences are still not there. And e-commerce consumer experience is still very, very narrow. I think that we can do that with the kind of technology we are trying to build or the kind of technology we will sell. We will solve those problems, right? We basically see searching on a catalog is hard, by the way. It's not that easy. You have to know what you're searching for, by the way. That means that there's going to be an intelligent layer that is going to search the catalog for you. It's going to happen. We're building that. We believe that India is also going to leapfrog that bit where we are going to do a lot of cataloging. We're essentially going to come to the point where consumers are just going to say, "I want this, 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 and this." It's the leapfrogging of all sort of mobile technologies as well. If you think about it, right? We've leapfrogged. Similarly, we're going to leapfrog in e-commerce, right? A whole bunch of our population is not going to go on catalogs and search for things. They're just going to say, "I want these 5 things," and they're going to get it. So, but they would not have experienced the whole catalog thing. I mean, we believe that all of India has experienced the catalog thing. No, India is still getting to the point where everybody is experiencing everything. So I think that we're going to again leapfrog that, and we're going to again build more sort of AI technologies that will come to the end customer, and they're just going to say stuff, and stuff is going to come. But that's because you have intelligent catalog searching, for example, right? So we believe that there's going to be leapfrogging in key areas, and we are selecting those key areas. While we believe that all sellers will eventually come on the ONDC network, or will help bring them on the ONDC network. Why not, right? I think it's a great public good, and we do want full pin code coverage. So it's in our best interest to sort of push that while we do
Yeah.
our thing as well.
You'll grow along with ONDC, hopefully get as many Kirana stores onboarded. Tell us the kind of research that you've done on Kirana stores in India. What does a Kirana store really look like? How much money do they make? What are the challenges? And is there a way in which you can help them, or other e-commerce, quick e-commerce players can help them? Give us a lay of the land.
So I'll tell you my personal story why I am so connected with Kiranas, the roots, right? My grandfather used to run a Kirana store. So there is a personal touch to it. So I grew up watching him selling items to the neighborhood. I grew
Hmm.
up seeing that connection of
Hmm.
network that he is trying to build, right?
Hmm.
Um, So personal connections always made me feel like, what if the future look like for all these people, right? Like if you look at like people in Kerala, like we still go and walk to Kirana stores. We don't order online. I asked my dad why is he doing that, even though there is Swiggy, Instamart is there, right, in Thrissur. So he said like, this gives him a chance to walk out and get some air and
Hmm.
go and talk to the neighborhood, right? Get some news. So people are not just doing commerce through kiranas. So that is something that we learned by just looking at observing things. So that is the experience that we are trying to build. We are not trying to build a commerce system, but an entire ecosystem of how the world live locally, right? At least in
Hmm.
India. So we don't classify ourselves as just another e-commerce enablement platform, but we classify ourselves as a local network of real stores who are actively involved in our day-to-day life. So be it buying groceries right now, that's what we are doing through the platform. But tomorrow it could be anything. Like tomorrow like remember the Kata system, right? Which was old enough where people used to actually credit, right? Before all these companies or startups started giving credits, or BFSI and all these companies come in, there used to be a system called Kata, where people used to give a book and write down all the information of the customer, and the merchant or the kirana store owner, the Gupta ji, know every person just by calling the name. So
Yeah.
this experience I actually realized when even living in Delhi. Like when I was doing my first startup, I was living in Gurgaon. We used to have a Guptaji store right down in our apartment store. And he used to deliver items within 10 minutes or 15 minutes if he has a chotu available. So I don't want to talk a lot about numbers, which is already visible in the internet that we can all
Hmm.
research and write about. But I want to find and tell you like all these key research items that I found interesting, right?
Hmm.
So that's what I want to highlight upon, and I let Dipankar speak the rest.
Yeah. So I think that the general sort of India has a fairly varied kirana store sort of presence, which means
Hmm.
that you typically are serving like 100 to 200 households per kirana store. That's a kind of
Hmm.
density which and of course the pin code coverage, as I've said before, is like is complete, right? You have kirana stores in all nearly all pin codes, right? The other thing is that generally they have a 15 to 16% sort of margin on the goods that they sell, and the incomes can range from like tens of thousands per day to lakhs per day. It depends on the locality, it depends on a lot of factors. But again, the interesting thing is that a lot of the new kirana store owners, typically who are younger, right? They are open to doing more digital things. Some of them have even have started offering, let's say, other classes of services, which is not only like, for example, mobile phone recharges in the early days was one of the sort of the value added services these guys would do.
Hmm.
But now a lot of other classes of what see, they are fundamentally entrepreneurial.
Like Amazon deliveries, they do a
Like,
bunch of stuff, at least in
exactly.
Europe. Yeah.
It is so interesting that that layer is fundamentally entrepreneurial, right? There is no reason for us to believe that if all the leads were not pushed towards them, that they would not consume and fulfill them. There's no reason to believe that they don't want more business, right? And from our initial sort of discussions with smaller stores, we do believe that all the smaller stores would want the leads to come to them, right? Fulfillment is hard, which means that delivering stuff is still hard. It's highly unorganized in some ways. Some folks have tried to spend a lot of money to organize the delivery layer, but it's still a challenge, of course. But if you look at the entrepreneurs on the ground who run the SMEs, I think they are all willing to, they're more than happy to do more business, right? They're not going to, they don't want, they don't have a problem. They're more than happy to sign up on Sulekha or justdial.com for a couple of lakhs a year to get leads from those sites, right? So nothing really changed if you think about it from the dynamics of the internet market for stores, right?
Yeah.
They'll sign up, they'll get some phone leads because they come up on Google. They want to do all of those things. The challenge is that the modern consumer, right, is not interested in calling anymore. Modern consumer is now interested in going to an app and then essentially dealing with a catalog, right?
So
Or
calls are dead. Is that what you're
calls
saying?
are
You could be
calls,
right. You could be
calls are
right.
dying. Yes, it's definitely dying, because I think that there's a lot of sort of cognitive overhang in terms of waiting for stuff to get done, because you
Hmm.
call, you're waiting, you're trying to convey information, unless you know the person or they know your rota, right?
Yeah.
It's so hard, right? So I think that the consumer is going towards the point where they want a certain level of convenience without having, like, they have limited cognitive energy to do certain things. While
Hmm.
we can see that the demands and the spend on the Kirana store side has not changed. They're still spending money, putting the phone numbers across on the internet, or trying to get visibility. They're trying to do all the right things. They just don't know how to market themselves, right? They have a distribution problem, but the distribution has been shifted into a place where they can't really pay to distribute themselves, right? So in some ways there's a new actor that has come in, right, who are spending money to market themselves to be this one point store, but they can't. I mean, none of these stores can really go out and say, you know what, I'm going to give you, like, I'm this pin code, I'm willing to pay this much money to surface up on the search in that pin code. You can't do that, right? Not for
Yeah.
Zepto, not for anyone else. So we feel that there is this sort of a middle ground that has come up, and this huge opportunity has opened up, right, for us to do these things correctly. And there's no reason why, if a store is performing really good on its KPIs in terms of delivering, in terms of the goods, the variety of goods it keeps, and it delivers on and does all of those things, right? Why shouldn't the algorithm not just rank them better, not give them more business? All of that should just happen, right? So neither Google does it, Zepto is not interested in doing it. So ONDC is just a layer that gives them a seller app. Someone has to do all of that algorithmic stuff in the middle, right? So we want to do all of that stuff. Like, we want to make sure that they're able to promote themselves, they're able to algorithmically rank themselves. Why not, right? So that
Would
opportunity
you
has
not
definitely
think
come up.
would you not think that the larger players will have an unfair advantage in ranking and promoting? Maybe they can decide to spend on advertising
So
on in some shape or form. I don't know how you're thinking about your business model, but one very straightforward way in which many people would say is that, hey, people should pay money to promote themselves on Kirana Pro. But I think it'll be good for our listeners to hear from you guys about your business model and this ranking, and does the biggest gorilla get the best rank?
the way we have sort of designed the broadcast system and our matching system, right? Uh, our goal is that the customer should be fulfilled from one store, which means that stores that actually have provisioned themselves correctly, right, in terms of their catalog, in terms of the inventory that they've kept, right, those stores are going to be successful. By the way, that is not very different in the real world, right? You will go to a store that actually keeps all the stuff that you want, right?
Hmm.
Or the
Hmm.
store will eventually start keeping all the stuff that you want, right? And we believe that that shift is that's the first thing, right? We want the Kirana store to focus on serving the customer needs, right? And that requires us to give them data, right? So we will of course give them data which tells them, you know what, these are the kind of searches that's happening in your pin code, right? Because if you
Yeah.
realize, right, that data is not available today. There's such a hit and miss scope for, like your local Kirana guy does not know what you're buying from Amazon or Zepto. He has no information. It's not public information, so thus he's
And
completely paying it
it's not shared at all, even
it's not shared at
privately
all,
with. Okay.
right? I mean, at least with Google, you can go on Google, you can see the keywords, and you can sort of get an assessment of what's really going
Hmm.
on. But for every other class of service, right, that data is completely opaque, right? So there's a whole opaque data problem, right?
Right.
So it's a double. This is a really vicious cycle, right? Because now the Kirana store does not know that he has to do something which he didn't know about, right? So it's in that cycle, he doesn't know the new brands that he has to stock, right? What he has to keep, he has no idea, right?
Yeah.
So in that sense, at some point of time, you had like a catalog of 200 things that he would keep, and he would know these are 200 things that people usually ask for, right? But right now he has to keep this whole long tail of smaller items, right,
Hmm.
which is very very hard to figure out without the data, right? I know stores that have done this, okay, which have which have very sort of progressive sort of founders of the stores, Kirana stores, who actually sort of keep, like, very unique things. small things, right? They keep new brands, right? But that the burden of such innovation cannot lie at that layer. We have to ensure that the data problem at that layer also gets resolved, right? And
Right.
if everybody's assuming that the Kirana guy is somehow one day going to suddenly come up and imagine these like 5 new D2C brands he has to keep, it's not going to happen, right?
Hmm.
So we believe that we are in this sort of cycle where data, not enough data is there. So because they don't have access to data, they are stuck with the same old vendors. Because they're stuck with the same old vendors, they're not able to really capture any sort of the requests and actually fulfill them. So it's a crazy bad cycle for them. We can break that cycle. We can break the cycle by actually funneling leads through a system like this, by providing enough data coverage and actually letting them play the game that they've always played, right? I mean,
Hmm.
we've from our perspective, enablement needs to happen at a couple of layers. I think it's not only leads, it's also information. And yeah, and we're building systems that would allow for both of that, like at an India level, right? And why not, right? If there are enough leads that go through us, I'm more than happy to sort of build
Yeah,
these classes of systems across India. Yeah.
makes sense. Tell us where have you launched? What are your launch plans? And why do you think consumers would choose you? I think your story is very compelling, and I can see the clear differentiation of business model, the focus on empowering the Kirana store, uh, building on top of ONDC and growing alongside with them. But customers also like discounts, and people like 8-minute delivery, 5-minute delivery, whatever. Talk to us about how are you thinking about some of these problems, because there would be some people who would really like the narrative and the story and the strategy and choose you, but ordinary customers may not be that way. So how what's your thought process?
Yeah, so we are live in 7 pin codes in Bangalore now. Uh, we launched today at 3 p.m. Which is
Congratulations, by the way. I'm
thank you,
glad we're
thank you.
doing this today, first of
And
many. Yeah.
yeah, as we speak, we have already crossed more than 500 active users per hour. So we are looking at that traction, which is
Hmm.
like interesting for us, which is like how much time people are actually spending on an app, right? This is the first time you are spending on an app for commerce that much time, because otherwise you go to any other e-commerce apps, you go and browse the content and you do impulsive purchases, right? But
Hmm.
here, for the first time, people don't have a catalog. Like it's a blank state of mind when you go into the app, and then you speak your mind and thoughts, right? Like I see queries which are interestingly reminds me of SMS Gyan, my first startup. Like
Hmm.
people are asking how to make chicken biryani for 4 people, and then the
Hmm.
card comes up with all the interesting ingredients to make it, right? So I see.
Fantastic. This is the Shunya one, right? I can see, by the way, Deepak and Dipankar are here with me on the pod, but there's also a dashboard where they're looking at the orders every hour, every minute since it got live. I know.
Yeah, yeah,
Great feeling. But tell
yeah,
us, like, it'll be good time for us to also hear about Shunya, the stuff that you
yeah,
launched on Product Hunt. And well done. Ranked
yeah.
fourth
Thank you, thank you.
yesterday. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Dipankar, why don't you talk about Shunya more?
Right. So I think Shunya again connects back into the discussion we're having, right? So if you think about what's really happening, right, is that catalogs catalogs are hard to build, hard to maintain, right? Which means that we can't expect Kirana stores to keep building these catalogs and keep maintaining these catalogs. So we will have a class of systems, right, that will essentially interact with the store, help them build what we call as a pseudo catalog, right? A catalog which feels like a catalog, but it's not as hard edged as like it's not like they don't have to do data entry. Basically, think of it like a web agent that's basically listening to the shopkeeper, right? While on the other side, the consumer has a goal in mind, right? They want to buy snacks for a party of 20 people under budget of 1,000 rupees. That's the kind of things that people are trying to solve for themselves. They're not really trying to solve for like 5 packets of chips and 2 bottles of Coke. No, I don't think people are solving for that. So there is a very interesting class of systems that Shunya is going to enable, which is the consumer essentially creating a cart from what they're trying to achieve, right? Which might be setting up for a party or making some dish that they want, right? And how to actually find the right items from a catalog, because a catalog at the end of the day is not your recipe. Right? It's not a set of things. So like for example, if Deepak wants salt, he doesn't get 10 grams of salt. He gets a kg of salt, of course, right? Because nobody sells 10 grams of salt, for example. So at the end of the day, when you're going to a store, right, it's you actually have to have technology that actually sends AI technology at this point of time, which will basically sit between the end customer and their demands, and try to fulfill by looking at the catalog what can be optimally done to fulfill that, right? So maybe there is a specific biryani masala that already solves for salt, so you don't really have to buy a kg of salt,
Yeah.
right? Now these are things, these are decisions that the end customer has to make, right? So from our perspective, the end customer actually basically uses technology like Shunya, right, to essentially create a cart automatically, while from
To
the other
speak to the
side,
app, and then the
yes,
cart gets
speak to the
created,
app or
and
even
then
write
the
into the app, right? I mean,
yeah,
the modality is you can even write on a paper and then send us. Think of it
in
in a
local language, if I'm not
in local
mistaken.
language, right?
Yeah.
And then from the shopkeeper perspective, you basically want to be able to speak, and once you are speaking and talking about the specific sort of goods that you have, right, it automatically creates a catalog from the shopkeeper's perspective, right? Because
Yeah.
again, you don't really need to do inventory management by doing data entry, right? So we believe that there is a whole set of new age sort of AI primitives that will get built up for commerce, and we're basically looking to start off with a Kirana Pro being the first in terms of the agents that we are launching and that can do this. But yeah, that's our goal. So the technicalities of it are that we are fine tuning a whole bunch of LLMs, multimodal models, and audio models to basically cater for specific languages, uh, especially understanding commerce, because commerce has certain nuances. So we want to capture those nuances in our language models. So that is the sort of
I
the
was actually quite
intent.
happy to see the response on Product Hunt last night. But the first question that struck me was that wouldn't GPT and some of these LMs be able to eventually include other models, languages, etc.? It's just a matter of time. And you're not like an LLM company, but it's a very interesting use case that customers can use. So I was wondering if
Absolutely.
you have any thoughts on that.
And so, absolutely. See, I think that the way we have to start viewing GPT and all these other companies are like infrastructure companies, and they're infrastructure companies that provide you with very fast and cheap compute infrastructure to do certain things. While
Hmm.
we are essentially what we call our application layer models, where we are fine tuning. In many cases, we would try to even build a model from scratch, but at least at this point of time in history, we are fine tuning those models. And the goal is that we we think that a lot of the research work and the sort of hardcore sort of data cleanups, a lot of that work still at the end of the day is going to be done by companies like ChatGPT, Meta. They are all going to do this. They're going to keep launching open source models, which we will use and we will consume. So we would see ourselves not at the research layer. We would see ourselves as the application model builders. Like we would fine tune the models, we would deploy those models on similar infrastructure, but we at no point would look to do all these models from scratch, right? Because again, doing these models from scratch is then it's a significant cost, and each of those model runs cost millions of dollars, right?
Yeah,
And
that's
the
a
cheap
different company. Somebody should build it. Like you don't necessarily
exactly
need to do that. Yeah.
exactly. And as for them extending the boundaries of the languages they understand, see, they will extend the boundaries of the languages they understand. What they are not going to do, right, is that they're so focused on trying to do benchmarks like math, physics. They don't have benchmarks for commerce, right? They don't care about commerce, right? For example,
Hmm.
or how good is the model at understanding certain aspects of the commerce or the retail language. They don't care, right?
Hmm.
So one
Hmm.
of the things is that when you're doing benchmark chasing in large language models, right, is that maybe these larger models must be really good at retail, but the smaller models that are getting compressed, they're definitely going to reject or at least going to prune out all the knowledge that is there specific to, let's say, retail or commerce. They're not interested in
Hmm.
that. So the smaller models
Yeah.
won't really perform in the domain that we are building for, and that's okay. That's what we want to specialize in. We want to specialize in building vertical models focused on a few areas, and that's the data sets that we're going to build and we are building out, and that's going to
Hmm.
be our sort of USP for this particular thing. But again, we are not in competition. I think there's going to be a whole set of vertical foundational model plays which are essentially fine-tuned models, but I think that's going to happen over the next few years.
Yeah, I mean, both of you should really try and build your category of one. It's a concept that I've written about extensively in HBR. But it seems to me that you're really on that path. I really want to wish you the very best. Of course, like you're a network cable people, so I want you to succeed. But even strategy wise, it does sound like an interesting play. But when co founders chat, they generally don't talk only about things that are working well or things that could work well. They also talk about fears. Talk to me about your fears. What are things that keep you up at night? What have you not figured out yet? What, if any, negative product feedback or customer feedback you've gotten? Give us a lay of the land.
So I think I stumbled upon this old video of Peter Thiel where he talked about competition, right? Where he mentioned about competition is for the losers, right? And so my biggest fear as of now is not from the outside world but inside world. What if we stop innovating, right? We
Hmm.
found out this exciting idea and we started working on it and we are starting building the models, everything, right? What if tomorrow the technology adoption curve changes? Like today it's AI, tomorrow it's something else, right?
Hmm.
Um, so that kind of ways is what is unpredictable, and that is my biggest fear. This happened with me in the past when I did my first company in OS, SMS Gyan. SMS was going nowhere after some time, and Android came and took it off, right? And we have
Hmm.
to shut down the company, give back all the money to the investors, and start again, right?
Hmm.
Uh, and then I did look up. The same thing happened. Q-commerce. I raised money from people like Twitter founder Bistone, Vinod Khosla, Narayana Murthy, all these people, all the great, amazing entrepreneurs, raised around $3 to $5 million, and then we started building it. And in some time, by around 2016, the hyper local market entirely collapsed because of
Hmm.
some companies raised billions of dollars. Like there are companies like Tiny Owl, there are companies like some other companies. They are all shut shop and they just destroyed the entire industry altogether, right?
Yeah.
And and that is my biggest fear. Like what is going to happen is like what if there is external factors which we can't predict, right? So that keeps me up all the night. So that's why we decided to launch Shunya also, because we believe that if we ride the entire wave of AI, which is where AGI comes into the place, which is where tomorrow someday, like I think probably by next year we'll probably see robots talking to each other, right? That's the expectation that the world is seeing in Silicon Valley, right?
Hmm.
So, what if tomorrow robots come and deliver products for you and you don't need to do anything? What if dark
Drones
store
already, yeah, yeah.
what if drones come and just deliver products in 1 minute, right? So these things makes me nervous. These things makes me uncalm, and that's what I the good thing is our time zones between me and Dipankar. He's in Scotland and I'm in India, so we can communicate in times which like most of the people are sleeping. So
Hmm.
that's one of the thing I want to highlight. Rest, Dipankar, you can share.
I I think that I think I mean I don't think of it in terms of fear, right? I don't believe that one has to fear anything. I mean, the biggest thing
Hmm.
one truly should be at least scared about, right, is the fact that we are not doing something that that is conceptually, I think, relevant. And when I say conceptually relevant, I mean that, for example, we have to believe in some ideas and have to believe very strongly in them, right? And sometimes it might look like it's like just going against the grain because because just because we are rebels, we are just going because right, this is what rebels do, right? But that's the thing, right? I think that when you are doing something like this, you have to be wired to think in a way that you are going to succeed, right? And your success lies in the fact that the ideas have got pushed across in the right format and in the way that people can actually understand. See, we might succeed, we might not. Like I and Deepak have done companies when nobody else was doing startups. Like nobody even knew what startups were. Like 2007, 2008, we were the first set of startups that got burnt out, and that's okay, right? Because you do it because you like it, you enjoy it, you think that you're pushing the right things, the right concepts, and again, I think that we are trying to do something which is very fundamental. It might take more time, right? But that's okay. right? And we might not even be the ones who end up doing this correctly, which is also okay, right? But again, getting the right ideas out there, pushing for the right sort of constructs in the market, and maybe if we can make this a non-zero sum game for everyone, even better, right? So we are coming from a place where we think that the kind of technology interventions that need to happen in India, right, to grow the SME layer, right, we believe that this kind of intervention is inevitable. At least I believe that fundamentally, like this is an intervention that's going to happen, right? And when this intervention happens, it's just natural that a company like us is going to emerge and going to do well. If we are the ones, I'll be very happy, of course. But if we are not the ones, I'll still be happy, because I think we will do a good job of at least explaining that something like this needs to exist. By the way, this is not the first time that I've tried doing something where I think where the delta is like this sort of abstract delta in terms of like where it can fit in the entire ecosystem. I do enjoy doing startups like this, but I think this time around the difference is that I think Deepak with his lookup experience, right, has seen some of the other sides of the problem as well, right? So we're going to have fun, and I'm not very scared at this point of time. I think Shunya is also a very interesting sort of intervention, which I think has much more global sort of impact if we can do it right. So it'll be fun.